There's a $2 tree bark that eliminates headaches, joint pain, and fever without a single side effect. Not reduces them slightly, eliminates them. Hippocrates prescribed it 2,400 years ago to every patient who walked into his clinic. Native American healers chewed it before every long hunt to prevent inflammation. In 1897, a German chemist isolated the active compound, proved it worked better than anything else on Earth, and then his employer patented a synthetic version and spent the next century burying the original. They didn't stop using it because it failed. They stopped because it worked too well. A bark you can strip from a tree in your backyard cannot generate quarterly earnings. And what cannot generate quarterly earnings must be erased from public memory. This is the story of the $2 painkiller Big Pharma buried in every forest. Welcome to Forbidden Camping. If you're not subscribed yet, hit subscribe and the bell. This is where we dig up what the pharmaceutical industry buried. The year is 1897. A chemist named Felix Hoffmann sits inside a laboratory at Friedrich Bayer and Company in Wuppertal, Germany. His father suffers from severe rheumatoid arthritis. The only treatment available is sodium salicylate, a compound derived from willow bark that has been used for pain relief since ancient Greece. But sodium salicylate tears apart his father's stomach lining with every dose. Hoffmann has spent 2 years trying to solve one problem. How do you keep the pain-killing power of willow bark while removing the gastric damage? He synthesizes a modified version of salicylic acid by adding an acetyl group to the molecule. The result is acetyl salicylic acid. He tests it on his father. The arthritis pain vanishes within an hour. No stomach bleeding, no nausea. Bayer patents the formula in 1899 under the trade name Aspirin. Within 5 years, aspirin becomes the best-selling drug in the world. But here's what Bayer never advertised on the label. The active ingredient, salicylic acid, was not discovered in 1897. It was documented 2,400 years earlier. Rewind to 400 BC in ancient Greece. Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, writes in his medical texts that willow bark powder mixed with water relieves pain and reduces fever. He prescribes it to women in childbirth, soldiers with battle wounds, and laborers with inflamed joints. Greek physicians across the Mediterranean adopt the treatment as standard practice. Roman military surgeons carry willow bark in their field kits during campaigns across Europe. Every legion that marched into Gaul or Germania had medics who treated injuries with willow extract before reaching a permanent hospital. In China, traditional medicine texts from the Han Dynasty around 200 AD describe using willow bark tea to treat headaches and lower fevers. Across the Atlantic, the Cherokee, Iroquois, and Lakota tribes harvested white willow bark every spring. They chewed the inner bark to prevent pain during long hunting expeditions. They brewed it into tea for women recovering from childbirth. They applied poultices made from willow bark paste to swollen joints and infected wounds. In medieval Europe, herbalists sold willow bark at every market square. Monasteries grew willow trees specifically for their medicinal properties. The plant was so common in folk medicine that the word salicylic itself comes from salix, the Latin name for willow. For over 2 millennia, every culture on 3 continents independently discovered that willow bark stops pain. That is not coincidence. That is chemistry working the same way in every human body since antiquity. This video is just the tip of what they buried. I collected everything Big Pharma and the outdoor industry don't want you to know, all inside the complete Forbidden Camping Vault. The willow bark, pain relief guide with exacted dosages and preparation methods, fire techniques that military special forces used and are now classified as dangerous, emergency shelter blueprints that cost nothing and outperform $300 tents, natural antibiotic plants that indigenous healers used for centuries, DIY water purification systems that engineers tested and couldn't believe, the earth battery that generates free electricity from wet dirt, the Trom wall passive heating method that slashes energy costs by 70%, and much more. Over 10 guides in one vault. No fluff. Straight to the point. The link is in the description. But stay right here, because the science behind this bark gets even more disturbing. In 1971, a British pharmacologist named John Vane published groundbreaking research in the journal Nature Genetics. He discovered exactly how aspirin works at the molecular level. Salicylic acid inhibits an enzyme called cyclooxygenase, or COX. This enzyme produces prostaglandins, the molecules responsible for pain, inflammation, and fever. By blocking COX, salicylic acid stops prostaglandin production. No prostaglandins means no pain signals reaching your brain. Vane won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1982 for this discovery. But here's the part that should make you pause. Willow bark contains the exact same salicylic acid that Vane studied. The natural version works through the identical molecular pathway as synthetic aspirin. A study published by the University of Maryland Medical Center in 2009 tested willow bark extract against ibuprofen for lower back pain. 191 patients participated over 4 weeks. The willow bark group reported a 14% greater reduction in pain compared to the ibuprofen group. The willow bark also caused fewer gastrointestinal side effects. Researchers at the University of Freiburg in Germany ran a double-blind trial in 2000 comparing willow bark to conventional painkillers for osteoarthritis. The willow bark extract provided equivalent pain relief to standard doses of COX-2 inhibitor drugs, but the willow group experienced significantly fewer adverse reactions. In 2008, a team at the European Journal of Pain tested willow bark standardized to 240 milligrams of salicin daily against placebo for chronic lower back pain. After 4 weeks, the willow bark group showed a 39% reduction in pain intensity scores. The placebo group showed just 6% improvement. That is a 6-fold difference in effectiveness with a tree bark that costs less than a coffee. A meta-analysis published in Phytotherapy Research in 2015 reviewed 14 clinical trials involving over 1,000 patients. The conclusion was unambiguous. Willow bark extract is as effective as aspirin and NSAIDs for treating chronic pain, acute back pain, and osteoarthritis. Every peer-reviewed study confirms what Hippocrates already knew in 400 BC. If you've made it this far, you already know more about natural pain relief than 99% of people walking into a pharmacy. Are you still buying $1,500 bottles of synthetic aspirin when a willow tree grows in half the parks in America? Subscribe and share this with someone who deserves to stop paying for what nature provides free. And remember, everything the pharmaceutical industry buried is inside the complete Forbidden Camping Vault. The link is in the description. Now stay with me, because what Big Pharma did next is the part they pray you never discover. The global over-the-counter painkiller market generates over $28 billion in annual revenue. $28 billion. Bayer alone reported $2.1 billion in revenue from its consumer health division last year, selling aspirin, ibuprofen, and acetaminophen to households across 83 countries. Their entire business model depends on one assumption: that you believe pain relief requires factory-synthesized chemicals only they can produce. Willow bark contains natural salicylic acid in a form that plant roots absorbed over decades of growth. It costs roughly $2 to $3 for enough bark to make 30 cups of pain-relieving tea. Aspirin costs $8 to $15 per bottle for 100 tablets that you'll finish in 3 months and repurchase forever. You cannot patent a tree that has existed for 60 million years. You cannot trademark a plant that grows wild across North America, Europe, and Asia. You cannot create a subscription model around something any person can harvest from a riverbank. And what cannot be monetized cannot be allowed to become common knowledge. In 1899, Bayer launched the most successful marketing campaign in pharmaceutical history. They distributed free samples of aspirin to 30,000 doctors across Germany. They published medical journal advertisements claiming aspirin was safer and more effective than any natural remedy. By 1915, aspirin was available without a prescription in every pharmacy in the Western world. But the campaign went deeper than free samples. Bayer funded medical conferences where speakers dismissed botanical medicine as outdated superstition. They sponsored medical school textbooks that featured full-page aspirin advertisements while removing chapters on herbal pharmacology. Sales representatives visited rural pharmacies and offered exclusive distribution contracts on the condition that willow bark products were removed from shelves. Within 20 years, an entire generation of doctors graduated believing plant-based pain relief was ineffective. The same physicians who would have prescribed willow bark in 1890 were trained to prescribe only patented synthetics by 1920. Here's what those advertisements never mentioned. The active ingredient was identical to the compound in willow bark. The only difference was the acetyl modification, which reduced stomach irritation but also created a patentable molecule. Bayer spent millions convincing doctors that synthetic aspirin was modern medicine while willow bark was primitive folklore. By the 1950s, medical schools across America had removed all references to botanical pain relief from their pharmacology curriculum. Students graduated believing that aspirin was a 20th century innovation rather than a 2,400-year-old natural compound with a chemical tweak. Herbal medicine textbooks that mentioned willow bark were dismissed as pseudoscience. The same plant that saved lives for 2 millennia was reclassified as unproven folk remedy in official medical literature. The suppression was elegant and absolute. Here's exactly what you do. Go to any health food store or order online and buy white willow bark. The package should say Salix alba, which is the Latin name for white willow. A 4-ounce bag costs between $2 and $5 and makes roughly 30 servings. Measure 1 to 2 teaspoons of dried willow bark and place it in a pot with 2 cups of cold water. Bring the water to a boil, then reduce to a simmer for 10 to 15 minutes. The liquid should turn light brown and develop a slightly bitter aroma. Strain out the bark pieces using a fine mesh strainer or cheesecloth. You're left with willow bark tea containing natural salicylic acid. Drink 1 cup for headaches, joint pain, or fever. The pain relief begins within 30 to 60 minutes and lasts 4 to 6 hours. For chronic pain like arthritis, drink 1 cup twice daily with meals. The presence of food reduces any potential stomach irritation. Store unused tea in the refrigerator for up to 3 days. You can add honey or lemon to improve the taste without affecting the medicinal properties. 1 4-ounce bag produces enough tea to replace an entire bottle of aspirin. Total cost, $3. Compare that to a standard bottle of Bayer aspirin at $12 that you'll repurchase every 2 months for the rest of your life. For camping and backcountry trips, willow bark is survival medicine you can carry in a shirt pocket. Pack 2 ounces of dried bark in a waterproof bag. That weighs less than 2 energy bars and treats pain for a full week in the wilderness, if you're near a water source. With willow trees growing along the bank, you can harvest fresh bark on site. Use a sharp knife to strip thin pieces from branches, never from the main trunk. Simmer the fresh bark for 20 minutes instead of 10 because moisture dilutes the concentration. For trail injuries like twisted ankles or overuse inflammation, drink 1 cup of willow tea immediately and another before bed. The anti-inflammatory properties work overnight while you sleep. I need to be honest with you about limitations. Willow bark contains natural salicylic acid, which means it has the same blood-thinning properties as aspirin. Do not use it if you're already taking blood thinners or before surgery. Pregnant women should avoid it, just as they avoid aspirin. People with aspirin allergies should not use willow bark. But for the 90% of adults who take over-the-counter painkillers regularly, willow bark works. The clinical trials prove it. The chemistry confirms it. And every herbalist who has practiced traditional medicine for the last 2,000 years knows it. Think about what you just learned. A German chemist in 1897 took a natural painkiller used since ancient Greece, modified 1 molecule, patented it, and built a $28 billion industry. That single chemical modification created a product you have to repurchase monthly. The original bark you can harvest once and use for years. Hippocrates prescribed it in 400 BC without a laboratory. Cherokee healers used it in the 1600s without a pharmacy. Your great-grandmother brewed it in the 1920s without a prescription. The knowledge didn't die. It was buried under a century of marketing that convinced you nature's medicine was inferior to a factory copy. But willow trees, don't forget. Salicylic acid doesn't expire. And chemistry that worked for 2,400 years will not stop working because a corporation wished it away. If this vault opens something for you, subscribe and share. Every share preserves what Big Pharma tried to erase. The next vault opens soon, and what the pharmaceutical industry buried this time is even heavier.